lead story has to do with an area that was claiming in the grip of terrible drought. No longer. Ferocious floods that roared through Texas, killing people, destroying homes, and a deadly path. The governor of Texas says the massive amount of water is the worst flooding that part of Texas has ever seen. He's declared a disaster in 24 counties. Wendy's got more.
The powerful thunderstorms that started during Memorial Day weekend are still hammering Texas and Oklahoma. At least 8 people have died in the past 3 days. Caitlin Burke has the story.
Residents in the Houston, Texas area say it's the worst flooding they've ever seen.
You cannot candy coat it. It's absolutely massive.
I'm standing in about 8 inches of water in my living room.
Probably like 6 foot deep at the Beltway, underneath the Beltway and I-10. That's where I picked up 8 people there.
The state's been pounded by thunderstorms, heavy rainfall, and tornadoes. Flash flooding in some areas, sweeping homes off their foundations, mowing down trees, and forcing evacuations.
It sends a powerful message to anyone who is in harm's way over the entire state of Texas over the coming days as we see ongoing rain. And that is the relentless tsunami-type power that this wave of water can pose for people. Whenever local elected officials or anybody warns people to get out of the way, to abandon wherever they may be, and to evacuate, the devastation that we've seen is a reminder to heed those warnings.
In neighboring Oklahoma, many of the same problems. 4 people there are confirmed dead, including a firefighter who died during a water rescue. Forecasters warn that severe weather is expected to continue across the south-central part of the country throughout the rest of this week. And today, the chance of severe thunderstorms expands farther east, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
It's unbelievable. Well, our prayers for our friends in Texas. It's just unbelievable how that water has come down. Never had anything like that in history. Well, in other news, after a humiliating defeat, the Iraqi forces claimed they're striking back against the brutal savages of ISIS. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
That's right, Pat. Iraq is launching a new operation to drive Islamic State forces out of Anbar province. That's the province to the west of Baghdad that ISIS invaded last year, conquering the strategic city of Ramadi this month. Its fall marked a major defeat for Iraqi forces. They had been making gains against ISIS over the past year with the help of U.S.-led airstrikes. Now, Iraqi TV has announced government forces have begun a new counteroffensive today to take back Ramadi. Pat?
It's a joke. It's a joke, but they're so-called forces taking back anything. It is just unbelievable what's happening. And the critics are beginning to raise serious voices. Ladies and gentlemen, we need a strategy. We don't have a strategy, but we cannot just give up Syria, give up Iraq, give up Iran, give up the Ukraine, give up the South China Sea, give up all the islands around. We cannot just surrender vast swaths of the globe to the forces of totalitarianism and chaos. We can't do it, John.
Pat, and speaking of that, the ISIS takeover of Ramadi is raising new questions about the Obama administration's strategy to defeat the terrorist group. The president says he wants to retain and rebuild the Iraqi army without committing American ground combat troops. But critics like Arizona Republican Senator John McCain say the U.S. has no real strategy for defeating ISIS.
There is no strategy. And anybody that says that there is, I'd like to hear what it is, because it certainly isn't apparent now. And right now, we are seeing these horrible, the reports are now in Palmyra, they're executing people and leaving their bodies in the streets. Meanwhile, the President of the United States is saying that the biggest enemy we have is climate change.
And former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton also warns the Obama administration's approach is failing.
I think they're in denial, but I don't think that's anything new. I think they've been in denial about the war on terror for the last 6+ years. They don't want to admit we're in a war. They'd rather treat it as a law enforcement matter. That's palpably wrong. I think their unwillingness to understand the nature of the ideological threat we face from the likes of ISIS paralyzes them in an ability to deal with it effectively. And we are losing. There is no doubt about it.
And Pat McThornberry, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, says ISIS has a lot of momentum on its side as the caliphate keeps growing in Iraq and Syria.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the most powerful armed forces in the world. It would take probably a couple of fully equipped combat brigades of the United States Special Forces to destroy ISIS. That's all it would take. Those clowns over there in Iraq that poorly trained, they run at the slightest provocation, they drop their weapons, they run and hide. We can't have that kind of stuff. But the American forces could do it, but we've got this fiction now that we cannot have any, quote, boots on the ground. Whether we like it or not, we were the ones that went into Iraq. We are the ones, as Colin Powell said, if you break it, you own it. And we broke it, and we still own it, whether we want to claim it or not. And it's time for us to recognize it's going to take a decisive move. It's going to involve maybe at best a fully equipped combat division to go in there, and we could knock ISIS off its pedestal in about a couple of weeks if we went in. Instead of that, we're watching them take territory after territory. They're getting oil refineries, they're getting oil fields, they're taking revenue, they're beheading people, they're selling women as slaves, they're doing all, they're trashing historic archaeological treasures. I mean, it just is horrible what they're doing. We could stop that. But it means we've got to take action against Syria. We've got to go in there, find the right ally, and go for it. And we've got to move into Iraq and defend Baghdad. Otherwise, these guys are going to come and they'll have Baghdad, and then we'll have a bloody, nasty, horrible fight to get it back. Oh, that's what happens when you elect a community organizer with no experience as your president. It was a big mistake. John.
Pat, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has appointed longtime foreign policy confidant Dore Gold as Director General of the Foreign Ministry. It comes as much of the international community is at odds with Israel while cozying up to Iran. Netanyahu will serve as foreign minister himself, but he appointed a deputy minister to work closely with Gold. Gold says he knows Israel faces significant challenges. Earlier this year, he told CBN News about one of those challenges, conveying the threat Iran poses not only to Israel, but to the U.S.
The moment Iranian Revolutionary Guards went to Mexico to recruit an operative for a mass casualty attack, I'm speaking about someone who was a member of the drug cartels, you saw that Iran's support for regional destabilization, for infiltrating the United States is now part of their policy. Mm-hmm. And they did that without having nuclear weapons.
The Jerusalem Post says that by appointing Gold, Netanyahu has put a close ally in a key ministry position. The growing amount of debt around the world is one of the biggest threats to the global economy. That's the warning from Andrew Wilson, the European chief executive of Goldman Sachs Asset Management. And he points out that as people get older and older in the U.S., Europe, and Japan, it's going to be harder to pay down all that debt. The London Telegraph reports that Wilson says as populations grow older, these major countries no longer have the young working population required to keep their economies going and generate enough money to pay off their debts. Well, here at home, the federal government is still backing up a great deal of liabilities in the financial system, according to the Wall Street Journal. The Federal Reserve of Richmond reports that U.S. taxpayers are standing behind nearly $26 trillion of financial liabilities. The Dodd-Frank Act was supposed to prevent more big bank rescues. Instead, critics say the federal government would almost certainly act to bail out major banks or other financial institutions. And now the amount of financial assets potentially at risk for a bailout appears to be higher than ever. Well, it turns out you can eat eggs after all. The government is reportedly going to drop cholesterol from its list of nutrients of concern. As CBN News has reported many times, many experts don't believe there's a relationship between high cholesterol in foods and harmful levels in the blood. The London Daily Mail reports that the Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee in the Department of Agriculture will change its recommendations and no longer warn people to avoid eggs or other foods laden with cholesterol. That will change decades of cholesterol warnings. And Pat, it's good to hear that the almighty egg has been given the all clear.
Well, I'm glad they're listening to our program. We have done our best. But I tell you, the statin companies are going to be going out of their minds because Lipitor and all those other drugs that are multi-billion-dollar sellers are suddenly in the tank.
I had 3 eggs yesterday. 3 scrambled eggs.
That's why you're so healthy.
3 scrambled eggs with the yolks.
Yeah. Cholesterol, you need cholesterol for your brain. Your brain works on cholesterol, and we need cholesterol in our bodies.
Fat is your friend, sugar is your foe.
There you're talking. But I tell you, just think about Lipitor and think about Crestor. I'm down thanks to Crestor and the little ladies dancing through the office.
And then that long list of side effects that makes you want to run for the hills.
It's horrible. And we warned people about it, and now they're saying you don't really need those drugs to begin with. That's going to, I think Pfizer's the one that makes Lipitor. It's going to be a body blow economically to them, I guess. But maybe those drugs came off patent anyhow, so it won't be long before they lose their patent, and maybe whatever it is, they're telling the truth. You've heard it here, though, ladies and gentlemen. You listen to this program, you'll hear health news way ahead of the FDA and these other guys.